The quilt was never created to be a passive memorial. Certainly I wanted my friends to be remembered. Certainly we wanted people to have an opportunity to grieve. But it was always a weapon. It was intended to galvanize action. It was intended to shame the government for its lack of action. It's very important that we remember those horrible decades before effective treatment became available, because it is still relevant. We're sitting on Market Street, just a half a block from the corner of Castro Street. And this particular building has a lot of historic significance and personal significance for me. This is the location of the very first workshop for the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. What happened with AIDS in the 80s and 90s still reverberates. The trauma is transmitted intergenerationally. This neighborhood is still affected by what happened in HIV/AIDS. The story of the AIDS Memorial Quilt is very much also part of the story of Harvey Milk. I had the idea for the quilt on November 27th, 1985 at the annual candlelight tribute to Harvey Milk and George Moscone. That week, the death toll from this neighborhood had just hit 1,000, killed by AIDS. That night, as people were gathering to remember Harvey Milk and George Moscone, I had everybody write the names of their loved ones who had died on placards. And we went to City Hall, we left our candles there for Harvey Milk and George Moscone. And I'd hidden extension ladders in the shrubbery, and we climbed up and taped these placards. And looking at that patchwork of names, I thought, oh, it looks like some kind of strange quilt. I thought of my grandma, my great-grandma back in Bee Ridge, Indiana. It was such a comforting, warm, middle-class, middle-American, traditional family values kind of symbol. The quilt is made up of individual panels. Each one is 3 feet by 6 feet. Each one representing an actual human being, created almost always by people who knew that person well and loved them. Many of the first quilt panels are very angry, and mine was spray painted. It was not a traditional quilt like my great-grandmother painstakingly sewed together. It was raw and it was vivid and it worked.
The quilt is, we have 6,020 of these 12 by 12s. That's 50,000 panels and about 105,000 names. Everybody always says how big it is, but I look at it like it's pretty small. I believe that it's about 14% of the United States deaths.
I have worked on 2 panels. One was for my partner, Brian Alosi, who died in 1989. I was just this person who loved someone who lived with AIDS and died. The Names Project filled that void that was there, that was missing.
We unfolded the quilt for the first time on the National Mall in front of the Capitol building. We saw it as evidence for the government to contemplate its failures in addressing the crisis.
When we were done, we had no plans on going any further than that. When we got back, there were so many phone calls. We were forced to go on, because so many people, we realized how many people needed us across the country. It has always been driven by the quilt, not by what we wanted, but the quilt. I still believe I felt like I was holding onto the edge of it. It was flying, and I was trying to keep up with it. And he said, I hope you always think that way about the quilt, because it has a mind of its own, and we just kind of follow it.
The AIDS Memorial Quilt is the largest piece of community folk art in the entire world. It's pieces of fabric sewn together representing lives. We call their names. It's particularly special over time to say that these people matter.
The quilt is known and loved by people all over the world, but there is no place in the world where the quilt is as loved and as respected as it is here in San Francisco, the city where it was born. So it's very important to me to know that the quilt is back where it will be preserved and cared for and loved and respected. 3,300 panels will be going on display in Golden Gate Park. A great many of them will be for San Franciscans, and a great many of the people who created those panels will be able to see them for the first time in a very, very long time.
Not all activism is necessarily loud. Some of it can be quiet. As long as you have a commitment to the cause, you are definitely an activist.
There is sorrow in my town. There is panic all across the nation.
We're going to stop the AIDS crisis. The hard work is before us. Now it's a matter of getting to those communities and populations, whether it be those that are unhoused, whether it be communities of color, black and brown, in marginalized areas, in remote areas, where the infection still rages on.
Would it seem so strange? It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change.
When we started this, Gert and I were furious. And we are still furious. But I also want you to know that in my heart, thanks to this quilt, all that hate and fear and despair has been replaced. And for me, this quilt is the physical embodiment of love, courage, and hope. Now we will begin the reading of the names. Blaine Cunningham, Brad Hay, David Flores, Jim Poche,
Camille, Juan Miguel Torres, Chuck Preston,
Lori Garcia, Leo Amatuani, Dale Skiven Jr.
The threads that are woven into each panel carry thousands of unique stories of grief, love, and hope. This is what makes the quilt so special. Later this fall, sections of this quilt will begin traveling to communities in the southern United States to reach population most at risk today.
When you work on your panel, that particular panel is your sole focus. You're not necessarily thinking of it within context of these tens of thousands of other panels. And then, of course, you see it and you realize you're just one tiny fraction of this much larger world tragedy.
My beautiful cousin, Mark Melendi. It feels like he's here. It sounds so silly. It's equal parts happy and sad.
Scott and Doug, my sons. Georgie, Amanda, Miss Kitty Blake, Edward Steer.
I'm particularly pleased to see so many younger people. I knew that there would be older people who lived through the devastation, but it's good to see a younger generation coming and learning about it. Now, 35 years later, we got 40 million dead and 40 million more living with the disease and still no cure. You know, I'm still pissed off and it's not over. People are still dying. People are still not getting access to the medications. We still see the same racial disparities playing out. So we're going to take the quilt on a tour of the southern states where the infection rates remain unacceptably high.
When young people see it, because they've heard stories about uncles and brothers and aunts,
They'll talk in whispers to us. Is there some way that I can participate with this? No one in my family talks about this. People want to have an opportunity to express their grief, the memories of their loved ones. And we find, yes, there's a safe space for you.
The quilt ended up transforming the way this country looked at AIDS. Tens of thousands of people participated in creating it. Millions of people visited the displays, and hundreds of millions of people heard its message. In that way, the quilt saved my life.